Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo all reject Linux on their consoles, and there's a good reason behind that. Microsoft, it's obvious, but the others have a good technical and business reason to not use Linux for gaming. Also, we define a console as a specialized device for and only gaming, not a PC with joysticks that happens to game. So the main conflict of interest between console makers and Linux is the GPL license. This forces any project that is derivative of the GPL code to also be licensed under GPL. Google, they got around this via the software services layer, but that isn't good enough for the control that console makers need. And Nintendo, for example, they absolutely hate mods. And if they use Linux, it would be an endless field day with emulators on launch date, homebrews, and video game mods. We know how much Nintendo hates all those, so we can automatically cross out Nintendo using Linux for their console OS. Sony though, unlike Nintendo, Sony they actually tried out having Linux on the PS3 via its OtherOS feature, but it didn't turn out well. It was a time when consoles were actually competitive with PCs. The PS3 was so powerful it almost got export controls. Essentially, a single PlayStation 3 performs like a cluster of 30 PCs at the price of only one. The US government then started buying PlayStations like hotcakes, turning it into one of the most powerful supercomputers in the world. Universities, they also went on a spending spree with Stanford, using it for medical research. Sony didn't like this, but they tolerated it until Linux created massive security vulnerabilities for them. And unlike Microsoft, Sony doesn't have the decades of experience Microsoft has with dealing with hostile users and attackers on a global scale.
Yo, it's GeoHot! And for those that don't know, I'm getting sued by Sony.
So Sony just opted to remove the OtherOS feature and never went back. There's also more reasons for companies like Sony to not want to try using Linux in any form again. So one of them is with cheating. Okay, to be fair, it's easy to cheat on console with custom hardware, but it's far easier to cheat on Linux compared to console without custom hardware. On Linux, the user is supreme. If a user wants to install kernel level rootkit to hide their hacks, the OS is designed to let them do it. Console makers want an OS where they are supreme and the user is just a guess. I cover more in this video on Linux and anti-cheat. This freedom to modify the OS also creates a DRM nightmare for AAA studios. Game companies, they need DRM. It's a necessary evil. Even Valve uses DRM for games to avoid business harm. Console makers, they really don't want that freedom to turn into a liability for making piracy too easy for casual gamers. Okay, it's a risk console makers just don't want to take. So what do Sony and Nintendo use for their OS? They fork FreeBSD because one, Linux is not a complete OS. You got the kernel, the GNU core utils, and then everything else. Kind of a pick and choose that then lets you create the complete OS like Ubuntu and etc. FreeBSD though is a complete end-to-end operating system. The end-to-end nature of FreeBSD makes it much easier to fork. The license of FreeBSD is also permissive, so they don't have to disclose source code. And they maintain the security through obscurity advantage. Linux kernel's API also moves quickly. It's great for servers, but not so much for console devs who value stability. Watch for the ideologues pretending they know the difference between a kernel API versus a stable system call. Now, am I saying use FreeBSD instead of Linux desktop for gaming? No. Linux is a second-class experience to Windows for gaming, but at least it has a class. FreeBSD doesn't have any class in gaming unless you provide the tool chains like console SDKs do and users. Don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts down below.